Okay. Brian's probably one of the most provocative. I mean, there's no doubt he's bright. There's no doubt he's connected. There's no doubt he doesn't have the most incredible work ethic. Meets so many people. How many appointments have you had in Cannes?
Like 70.
70. That was each day. But his passion for the industry and his passion for business and what happens in everything that we do is fantastic. So let's have a chat. Brian?
Let's.
Please. Can I offer you some water?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. You have lots. Okay.
I got this whole table.
Yeah, can you pass one to me,
For
please?
you one?
Thank you.
Sparkling?
Let's talk about some of the big topics, some of the big trends.
Let's.
Now, obviously, the challenge is to sort of control the conversation, but let's
Good
start.
luck.
Exactly.
Good luck.
Let's start with
I'm the
Holcos.
puppy who chewed off his tail, his leash.
This is going to be fun. Let's start with Holcos. Let's start with consultancies. Let's start with the nature of agency space, because here we are in Cannes, and we have this, what was a trifecta of the clients, the media owners, and the agencies, and now we have increasingly the technology companies here at Force. And we'll talk about them in a while. But if I think about our constituency, of which we, Dentsu Aegis Network and Dentsu, are part of, I'm keen to hear your perspective, because you've written quite a lot extensively about WPP. As you and I talked about earlier, I arrived 6 months after Michael Roth arrived at IPG. IPG then was the industry's basket case. And in came a relative outsider to the industry and fixed it and turned it around. And I think Robert Qatar's got some of the same challenges at WPP. What do you know about that, and how does that reflect on our industry sector?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure.
And a lovely space. So I think there's a view that many will have that the industry is going through some kind of a structural change, and it's not cyclical. My take is more nuanced than this. If there was a structural change, it was the rapid growth of the media agency industry from 2002 to 2016 and a half. 10% organic, excluding global financial crisis, 20+% margins. Do the math on that, and that's like the bulk of the industry's growth. And we, those of you in and around media agencies know what those dynamics were that caused it. And, just the growth of digital meant it's great to get paid by the hour when it takes a lot more labor to spend $1 in media, right? I mean, among other factors. But if there was a structural shift, it was that uptick shift more than the downtick shift. And there are a bunch of reasons that's gone into that. And creative agency struggles are a longer term, maybe more structural problem. But nonetheless, the consultancies out there, the Accentures of the world, perceived by many as being something very threatening, very large. And I don't know if you remember, in 2007, I made a slide deck for you featuring the marauding armies of consultants, including Accenture and McKinsey and others on one side, and then the armies of Google and Facebook, and then we had the armies of the agencies centered around the client. And so we were certainly aware of their potential 10 years ago. But the narrative would suggest that these guys are driving even greater disruption. On the consultant side, and this may be condescending from their perspective, they are trying to be condescending to agencies when they say, we don't want your paltry OPEX budgets, we want bigger CAPEX budgets. You can have your low margin business. By the way, good for you, that client, that they don't realize that there is a business. And they want this CAPEX budget for business transformation that is only marginally taking away from the creative agency. But the narrative of these big, bulky, scary, massively capitalized, technology-centric companies who seem like they must be smart seems to create or contribute to a narrative of more significant structural change. Well, I hear this from, Mark Reed has made comments to this effect. And I think Roberto Corte has also made comments to this effect, that reinforce the idea that I think they think there is more significant structural change. And I'm not trying to ignore that there are changes. Like I say, on the creative agency side, I think there's greater problems with the erosion of the idea that you need an always-on creative agency, and the idea that far too many creative agencies have maybe treated their assets that they produce as precious, too precious maybe, and maybe too expensively produced for a world where you need thousands of units at a time. So trying to balance all these issues here, where I see Quarta certainly look at the world is very open-minded to how the world is changing, not prejudging what the outcome should be. I've been impressed so far with how he's characterized how he's approaching things. I think that said, he seems to have a long time horizon. This is not going to be a quick fix, which will be great for you guys, if Dentsu people, and everyone not named WPP, because it's going to be a while before they, A, get a CEO, B, do necessary restructuring, C, have a story that's as compelling. I'd argue that you guys have a good story, by the way, but I hope you'll know what I mean when I say this. Publicis has the best story right now of the holding companies. And I separate a story from reality. They're not the same thing, right? They can be, but
but they're not here to tell it.
No. That's a good point. But I think that there's a WPP's story is probably the worst right now, and it will be bad for a while.
Well, that's why I think outside of the challenges that they have individually, and I have to say, if that was a US-listed company, I think the class action lawsuits would have started very significantly.
Martin would never been pushed out.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, if a board is responsible for two things, it's compliance and succession. And I don't think the WPP board has really got either of those right when you look at it objectively. Notwithstanding, there are a number of players I've already met with here in Cannes who feel that the ad industry is very late. Maybe not too late, but if you look at the record industry, you look at the movie industry, you look at the television industry, you look at what's going on. As you said, these are secular, fundamental changes. This is not an incremental. This is changing so quickly, whether the ad industry...
And you're of the view that there is more meaningful secular change, I think.
I agree. It's
Okay.
coming. That's my point. That it's coming fast, and we've got to get ahead of it. Talking of which, let's shift gears and talk about, again, I see some of my colleagues here from Google. Google are another one of the major technology companies to have reinvented the world. I mean, wonderful consumer products that are free. I couldn't live without Google Maps. And you think about Facebook, and we're thinking about Amazon, and we're thinking about these companies that fundamentally change the way the world is working, and also the way the advertising is working. What's their impact? What's your view? And especially when you think about Netflix, what's going on in the world of TV now in a way of trying to fight back? We're looking at AT&T having successful now in getting hold of Time Warner. The big fight is now carrying on. Who's going to catch the fox? Is it going to be the mouse? Is it going to be the Roberts clan, Comcast? Are they too late? Do they have a chance of catching up with the Facebooks and the Googles who have been so successful and can so much advertising money? Does TV have a new bright future in your view?
Well, let's separate the consumer story from the advertiser story, and also be mindful of the commercial story, commercial in a commerce sense story as well. I think there's a healthy indifference to advertising on the part of at the Bob Iger, Brian Roberts level. That advertising is just a means to an end for a very small part of the business.
As a revenue stream.
Yeah, as a revenue stream. I mean, and again, it's amazing. Like NBC Universal may be the world's third most important seller of advertising, but they're pretty unimportant in the context of Comcast, which is amazing, right? But I'm saying from an investor perspective, it's not what investors are focusing on. And so at the top of the company, you also don't necessarily have people who are as deep into the business, the advertising business. So I think when I say there's a healthy indifference, they'll take a point of view about what advertising is going to do, and they're going to kind of work around it. They're much more focused on building longer-term let's call them consumer-centric businesses, where they can get consumers to pay. The problem that I see is, while content's never been higher quality, and we can argue that people are more happier with what they watch than ever before, and consumption is actually pretty healthy, that doesn't follow that they'll spend more. They could, but
spend more on their content.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is where they wouldn't have to spend more if it is provided, if it's ad supported or brand supported. Then that potentially, if it's done right, strengthens the consumer value proposition.
Could be, but since neither Dentsu nor WPP nor Publicis owns the TV network. Well, actually, in Japan, different story, right? Yeah, different story. But in the United States and most countries, I think, again, advertising is just an afterthought. So I think that the view, though, is that well, here's the thing. The advertisers for whom television is the least bad alternative is a struggling bunch. 200 advertisers are 90% of network TV advertising and 60% of all advertising of TV advertising in the United States. That group of advertisers is relatively weak. And for them, if they are weak, it doesn't matter how strong TV is as an ad-supported medium. It's irrelevant. And sure, you can bring in some incremental money from the direct-to-consumer brands. You can hope that some middle-market marketers will start to spend more money on TV. But the reality is they have digital media, which is their least bad alternative for the most part, and TV is a supplement.
Well, what do we then do? Because if you look at it in that way, we then all face an existential threat, because it does not help us when more great shows are sold to Netflix and more businesses going to HBO, or whether we're seeing Amazon Prime, we're seeing more quality content ahead, because we need to be able to access consumers. We need to be able to reach people to talk about our brand stories.
Yeah, but you don't need...
when I look at OTT and I look at the, and they're not ad funded, it gives me a greater rise for concern about the accessibility of what we're trying to do, which is great engagement between brands and consumers.
But I would argue that agencies are not, and marketers are not in the business of keeping media owners in business, right? I mean, sure, it's not a bad thing. Sorry, media owners, right? I mean, if they happen to suit your purposes, great. But your idea, your goal, your role is about engaging with consumers one way or another. Now, this may segue to the issue of the software companies, but I'm of the view, and it's not played out yet, that something like GDPR in Europe should correctly focus marketers' minds on the idea that if you can't persuade consumers to submit consent to let them use consumer data, if you're the marketer, sorry, you don't deserve the data. And you need, as a marketer, to do things to cause consumers to want to share data with you. And all the things that would follow from that could include things like building out bigger digital experiences, building out better products, better ways of engaging with consumers, thinking differently about what the product is. Side note, I live in Portland, Oregon, and there's a lot of microbreweries, and they're pubs, right? One of the older ones, I just saw they have a subscription product now. $30 for a year, you get free beer during happy hour, and you get invited to tastings. What a concept. I've never seen that before. But the point is that there's plenty of room for business reinvention, and there's plenty of room for agencies to help with that.
And that is around experience. And we certainly, the Dentsu Aegis Network, we have enough different marketing disciplines to ensure that we're in the business of building relationships.
Absolutely.
And building relationships through experience. And it's one of the, it's important, though, because we look at it both. You need communications and you need experiences.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the communications is born of us creating the right kind of compelling content, sequencing it along the customer journey, and then using that to direct people to the store, to the site, to whatever experience we want to build. So we're not doing that alone. But let me shift gears to that, because one, being able to tie together the potency of addressable advertising, which grows day by day by day. We can talk about AT&T at the moment, about whether we're going to get hold of AppNexus. And then not just addressable advertising, but personalized experiences. A lot of the importance of that sort of ad tech, martech stack relies on us working closely with companies like Adobe, Salesforce, These are more premier Oracle in some regards. What's you wrote very recently? You gave a review, another very positive review on Adobe. You put your price estimate. You keep it as a buy. You're pushing it up.
It's a hold, but yeah.
A hold.
But it's a high robust. I'm very positive.
Yeah, it's up to
I'm very positive about Adobe, certainly.
So what's your view of the platform companies and their role in this ecosystem?
Well, let's separate the platforms as in the software companies like Adobe and Salesforce, and even what Oracle's doing, and all the thousands of others MarTech software companies, from the Facebooks and Googles of the world. By the way, I'm going to flip the tables on you on that one in a sec. But on, I think that the Adobe's and Salesforce's are, I sat down with, I spent a lot of time with the then head of Salesforce Marketing Cloud about 2 years ago, and I did a non-deal roadshow with clients, investors, and heard the same pitch 10 times in a row. And as I was hearing him talk about what they call their Journey Builder product, I was thinking, oh my God, this is a software version of a comms planning pitch. And I realized that is what they are. Even though obviously there's some smoke and mirrors, and really it's email for the most part, but the concepts that they're trying to develop are the software versions of what you're doing. And they're trying to be agnostic as to, they don't care about keeping media owners in business. If it happens to be that they do, good for them, but that's not the focus. The focus is using software to engage with consumers and build a brand through the entirety of the customer journey, right? So I think that the companies that are trying to provide integrated suites are at least providing really important platforms for what you guys do as agencies, providing the service layer on top of the software. But the platforms, when we think of Facebook and Google, it's ultimately just spots and dots. I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, I wrote something...
Which one, on Facebook?
Facebook or Google, for the most part. I think that now there are going to be marketers where if you're a performance-based marketer, you're selling stuff on the web, and you can make that direct correlation, and you can do A/B testing all day long, and you use their ad products. Well, okay, that's fine. It's a cost of sales. It's just something, whatever. But for most marketers, you need inventory. You want your basic premise is that you need a certain amount of ad inventory, a certain number of impressions delivered in a certain way, and they happen to be the ones fulfilling it. They happen to be the least bad alternative, and that's it. But what do you think?
Well, I think they're getting better. I think they're working at it. I think especially with Google on YouTube, I see the momentum they're driving behind performance, brand and performance advertising coming together. I mean, 5 years ago, it was a very distinct line between the brand advertisers and the performance marketeers, and they were very much only dealing with the performance marketeers. I think the great strides they've made on YouTube, cleaning that up, making it more brand safe, improving viewability, is also starting to say there is a value and an appreciation for brand, and that really hadn't been there. Facebook, I think they're doing it, they're talking about it in the same way. And again, we've got issues. And we've also got opportunities about the way we work with them to pioneer, because to a certain extent, they've got the audiences, they have technology, they have the software, we have the services.
But they mostly want your money.
I think they all want our money.
Oh, that's true.
Everyone wants the money. And that's a universal. And we want the marketeers' money, and the marketeers want, and we want the media owner money. But talk to me about trends. What do you see now? Here we are in Cannes. This time last year, Snapchat had a huge Ferris wheel over there. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
That's not there this year. Facebook had just giant, biggest logos. It's now just calmed down a bit more. It's not a world domination strategy. It seems to be a bit more low-key. What trends? Because now we've had Kylie Jenner whacked out a tweet, took 8% off the market cap of Snapchat, said it was shit product, wasn't going to use it anymore. What other trend? What's happening that as we sit here this time next year are going to be, from your vantage point, some of the significant changes in the world?
Well, I guess maybe I'll...
In the world of advertising and marketing.
Yeah, two of the more important pieces that I'm constantly trying to assess is, first, the ongoing, increasingly important role of procurement. And, I think that increasingly people who are not in procurement can appreciate how to think like procurement, and that procurement is not necessarily a four-letter word. But translating procurement-based, translating what non-procurement people do into procurement language is something that I think will have to become more and more important because the pressures that marketers are experiencing and using procurement to manage aren't going away. They only get more and more important with every passing year. And imagine if we get into a downturn. Just imagine. So if you haven't studied your Kraliyek's matrices, start opening up those operations management textbooks. The next thing is e-commerce and the rising importance, if you will, of Amazon, certainly, and the degree to which, last year, the thing that resonated with me so much was the Whole Foods transaction, which was announced on the Friday right before Cannes. Well, I mean, the ramifications of that are so significant, and I'm still trying to process them. I think a lot of people are, but I think that only gets more and more important. So I think that all things tying what agencies historically have done with marketers who historically have not had that responsibility becomes a more important thing.
And what about the trend? You this time last year, and certainly Scott Galloway, who we're good friends of, I mean, his drive to want to talk about breaking up big tech, forget about regulation, it's gone too far, it needs to be broken up, it's abusing the world, it's compromising society, it's damaging democracy. What's your view? Will there be greater regulation? There'll be greater regulation. Will there be breakups?
It would be really surprising. Honestly, I think that now the European Union has power to do a lot of things, right? And so it really just depends on how aggressive they're going to be when, not if, they issue fines.
Yeah.
And then same with the FTC. There will be fines. I don't think the FTC in the U.S. is going to be that interested in pushing for breakups. But I think in Europe, it's a different story. And so I'm not saying I'd count on it, but I would say that it really depends what the European Union wants to do.
I know I'm getting the wave to wrap up. Yes, that's a good idea. I'm going to ask one question and lead it and then offer it to anyone else. What's Snapchat stock market going to be worth this time next year?
My year-end 2018 price target is $9.
$9, you heard it here. Who has got a question for Brian Wieser? Or for me? Yes.
You said that Publicis has the best narrative out there. What is that narrative and why is it that?
Shanna's asking, so you said Publicis has the best narrative out there. What is it and why is it the best?
Power of one. No, I mean, it's a simple story. They're destroying... those who may enjoy their Leo Burnett perceptions of whatever that meant, Saatchi and Saatchi, whatever that meant, Publicis Worldwide, whatever that meant, bye-bye. And you could argue they're destroying important brands, but if the brands didn't resonate to the customer enough, then see you later. And the point is that I think that, and they weren't the worst example of this. You could argue that WPP, with the sprawling empire that it was, had so many different agency brand names. I mean, how many people in this room, if given 40 agency names outside of the global networks, could accurately assign those agency names to the holding company that owns it? Right? Very, very few of us. Maybe you could. Very few of us. And I mean, why do we need those maps, those wall maps? And those are for people who actually work in the business. So I think that they simplified the offering. I was so impressed when I saw, is it Charles Juba, I think? He runs Saatchi from London. At the Publicis Investor Day, and I would encourage you to watch their presentation from that Investor Day if you can. But he said, hi, I'm the creative from Publicis. Not even Saatchi? We're in Saatchi's building. Wow.
Yeah, but what's interesting about that is they always had that, and that's what it's called, Publicis. I worked there for long enough to realize that was the name of the agency, and Maurice always wanted to have the name of the agency, the name of the holding company. It was a different kind of strategy. He always wanted it to be one. He was really buying the other agencies to buy scale and access to clients.
Simple strategy, though.
So, yeah, no, very much so. But I think ultimately we've not, as an industry, when I think about the other professional services firms, we're locked into these multiple brands to handle conflict. Whereas I think when we think about McKinsey, we think about Deloitte, we think about legal firms, we think about the other professional services business. Obviously, what is seen as a conflict is seen as specialism in others. So we're going to see a shift in that, without doubt. I think clients will have to start relaxing that more. But boy, oh boy, it's a reaction. It's not a design and a plan.
Yeah.
It's a direct consequence of the conflict issue.
Can I say, though, I do think you guys have a good story. I mean, a good positioning. I mean, I'm not just saying that because I'm here. But I think
I think the thing is, ultimately, what we're working on is, and it's going to be announced tomorrow, we've got some great, I just heard we've got a wonderful Grand Prix winner, and it is about innovation because we have a brand promise. Our brand promise is, for those you don't know, is innovating the way brands are built. And I think any great brand has two things. It has a promise and it has performance. And you need to have a brand promise. What we struggle to do, and like every organization is always going to struggle to do, and we have to keep struggling to make it great, is to make sure our performance is consistent. Right. It's consistent across platforms. It's consistent across ways of working, as it is in markets around the world, as it is every day of the week. And I think to a certain extent, that's when the brand and the Dentsu Aegis Network brand has a clarity of purpose and a clear brand promise. And we're increasingly recognizing many of our clients don't want to talk about individual sub-brands. They'll want to talk about expertise. They'll want to talk about the specialisms we have. But how we organize ourselves and how we go to market, I mean, one thing we're realizing is what an individual client wants in Mexico is going to be different to what a client wants in China.
Well,
and we have to be flexible.
This is all more important than what the story is, right? But I'm saying, like, and I think I wrote this at the time, like Merkel and was M1, right? I mean, like, I think that the Merkel acquisition was a really important part of a story. That was a very desirable asset. And I think that improved the narrative too. But I mean, the point is that I think we can say that WPP doesn't have a good story right now, and they're struggling, and those two things coincide. It's not that because they have a bad story, they're struggling, right? They would have done better with, I mean, if they had Hearts and Sciences as a branding and organization of their assets that sounded as good as Hearts and Sciences, maybe they wouldn't have lost it. But on the other hand, maybe the client team was just too close to the client. They weren't centralized enough. They weren't doing enough work.
That's it. Let me just start. What other questions does anyone have for us? Yes.
Are the media agencies putting the platforms on the spot this year again, more so than the past? And how are they responding?
And that's Patrick Coffey from Adweek.
So the question is, are the media agencies putting the platforms on the spot, and how are they responding? I don't know what the other agencies are doing. We're having very candid conversations with our platform partners, and we view it as a partnership. And there are challenges that have been going every year. There's a different set of challenges. What we are encouraged about, and I think the more important meetings were the ones we had at CES following last year's Cannes, which was wasn't combative, but it was a very honest and frank set of frustrations we were sharing on behalf of our clients. And you know what they all are. You catalog those yourself. I think we're encouraged to see the momentum and the focus and the seriousness all those major platform companies have taken to the issues, and we're working through them. Are they fixed? No. Are there better industry standards about viewability, ad fraud, brand safety? You know, all of these issues are definitely on the improvement stage. So I don't know what the other agencies are doing. I know that we've had top-to-tops with all of our major technology platform partners. I've got two of our closest partners here, in the guys from Google. And they continue to be frank and candid. And to a certain extent, we have to be more determined to drive an innovation agenda that's about building brand and not driving performance. And that combination about how we demonstrate and use the multitude of omnichannel options as opposed to just going default into one platform conversation is something we have to challenge our clients as much as we challenge ourselves on. So to answer your question, those conversations are going on, and they're as candid as they always have been.
Last question.
By the way, that's the stuff that matters more than the brand of the agency or the story.
In what regard?
Well, how you manage that omnichannel experience, how you manage the customer, like what you just said is more important than what the story and the narrative is.
Well, this is something that building on that, we are spending an inordinate amount of time with everyone in the ecosystem and working really hard. So the obvious default doesn't just have us in an industry situation that's a consequence of a lack of thought and a lack of effort to work with some of the smaller players, whether it be Pinterest or Spotify or Snapchat, or how Oath are pulling their operations together, or even how AT&T, when you think about Brian Wieser now working over there on the AT&T addressable advertising side of things, I mean, it's a major opportunity now because they're betting big that spending $87 billion buying Time Warner is going to give them access to great content that they now have distribution and capability for. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do we use that? So to a certain extent, when these initiatives are happening and advertising and brand building is part of what they're thinking about as opposed to just a consumer subscription model, it just doesn't offer us any kind of opportunity. We're leaning in heavily. And by the way, we're doing that in not just about putting competitive pressure on the other players, but about making sure that our ecosystem is healthy and vibrant for everyone who's trying to build brands today and tomorrow. So we're certainly positive about it. Well, listen, I'm conscious that there's probably someone else coming to have a chat. What's our next... 1 o'clock. So you don't have... And what have we got at 1 o'clock so I can share with everyone? Oh, we got a Latin America panel about creativity and all things brand building in Latin America. So listen, thank you everyone for coming to listen. Brian Wieser is probably the smartest. No, he's not probably. He is the smartest, most progressive analyst in the industry today. If you don't read what he writes, try, work hard to do that. It's always stimulating. It's always provocative. And he's always fun to talk to. Brian, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Nick. Thanks everyone.
That was fun. Always fun.